All right. Welcome everybody to our 2025-26 CAASPP and ELPAC Accessibility Resources webinar. Um, we are sponsored by the California Department of Education, or CDE. My name is Tyler Shakwa. I work for ETS, and we uh, myself and my colleague Ashley Carr will be guiding you through this session today about the accessibility resources related to the CASP and ELPAC, and to access materials for today's training, including slides and a resource guide. You can visit our Padlet page, which I'll read out this URL, but Dina, our other colleague, is also putting this link in the chat for you all, so you can also just click on it there. But you can get to that Padlet by going to padlet.com/CASP_ELPAC/2526 accessibility. So if you need to type that in, you can. You can click on it in the chat, and on that Padlet page, you can add questions. So there's two different columns that you can put your questions in, whether you have general questions or questions about a specific resource. And also on that column, or on that Padlet page, are the links to the slide deck and the resource guide. That's a Word document that has a bunch of handy links in it that we're going to mention during the training today. There's also a few other pieces of information on the Padlet. There's an FAQ and a link to our accessibility resources webpage. These materials are also located on the upcoming and on-demand trainings webpage on the CAASPP and ELPAC website as well. All right, so just a couple of notes about this training today. So like I said, questions can be entered into the Padlet during the session, and the Padlet will remain available after the session as well if you wanted to go back to reference that. Slide notes are included in the PowerPoint file and the slides, so you can get that extra information there. And then, as usual, this session will be recorded and posted on the upcoming and on-demand trainings webpage. And recordings are usually posted within a week or two of the session, but 2 weeks at the most. So you can always go back and watch the recording if you need to. All right, quick overview of what we'll be covering today. So the session today, the goal is some high-level information about accessibility resources for the CAASPP and ELPAC. And we'll be going through, we'll have a couple poll questions actually to launch as well to ask about your role and your level of experience with CAASPP and ELPAC accessibility resources. But these are the main sections that we'll be going through today. So we'll be going through basics, accessibility resource basics, a little bit about user roles and responsibilities. We'll talk about how to practice with accessibility resources. And then we're going to do a demonstration of some important resources in our website so that you not only know a little bit about what we're talking about today, but you can actually see where to go and find it on the website yourself, because you will need to go and explore or even share some of those resources and links with other folks. So we'll do a live demonstration of our website towards the end, and then we'll get to any questions and answers at the end that we haven't covered already. All right. So we're going to start with a quick poll just to learn a little bit about everyone who is here in the room with us. So I'm going to launch this first poll that asks, how familiar are you with CAASPP and ELPAC? Oh, sorry, we're doing the role first. What is your role in your local educational agency or LEA or school? So if you can fill that out, and then you will be able to scroll down and see the next question, which is how familiar are you with CAASPP and ELPAC resources? So go ahead and take a minute to answer those. Got a lot of folks on today. Thank you so much for joining us. It looks like so far got a pretty good split. There's quite a few LEA district level folks, but quite a few teachers or TOSAs, site administrators, um, and it looks like for how familiar are we, that some folks are pretty familiar already. So you'll get a little bit of information about what is new. Um, but a lot of this might be, rehashed for you, but it's always good to have a refresher. But there's a lot of folks looking to learn more, or some folks who are brand new. So we'll go ahead and end that poll. So thank you so much. It's always helpful to learn a little bit about who is joining us. And then it's also, I think, helpful to just go over our learning goals for this session. Like I said, today's session is intended for any California educator who wants to know more about accessibility resources for CAASPP and ELPAC. And we're going to focus on that high level information. We won't be talking in detail too much about the functionality of specific resources, or covering the details on how to assign accessibility resources in TOMS, or the Test Operations Management System. But we will be pointing you to resources that can give you all of that information in more detail. So by the end of the training, we really hope that participants understand why it's important to make accessibility resources available to all students, where to find important information about accessibility resources, and then how to check and test accessibility resources using the practice and training tests or the interim assessments. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Ashley Carr, who is going to get into some of the accessibility resource basics.
Thank you, Tyler. Hi, everyone. So just to introduce myself again, my name is Ashley Carr, and I am one of the LEA success agents, success agents that work directly with the LEA coordinators. So I'm just going to start by going over the basics of the CAASPP and ELPAC accessibility resources. So equality versus equity. Equality is not the same as equity. So in the past, equality was often talked about in education, providing each student with the same educational opportunities. Now we're more focused on equitable education, providing each student with the tools and resources they need to be successful in school and to graduate ready for college and career. And those needs can vary greatly by individual students. So our goal is all about equity. So here's another way to think about it. If you look at the image in the slide deck with equality, we have four bicyclists who all have the same bike. They have equal equipment. The problem is that one of the cyclists uses a wheelchair, one is very tall and hunched over a bike that seems too small. One is using the bike and it looks like a perfect size, and one small cyclist is trying to ride a bike that is much too big. So instead, we want equity. With equity, each cyclist is provided a bike that meets their needs. The cyclist who uses a wheelchair is provided a modified bike. The tall cyclist is now riding a larger bike. The cyclist who had the bike that was perfectly sized is still riding this bike, and the small cyclist now has a bike that is appropriately sized, as you see in the image. Equity means that each cyclist has the correct equipment they need. So some students need something entirely different to help them achieve their goals. In this example, that's provided in the slide, when we provide all kids with the exact bike they need, either in size or in structure, they're able to enjoy the full benefits of that activity, in this case, assessments. So chances are the resources students are already familiar with or that they're using in the classroom to access learning are already available on the CAASPP and LPAC. The resources might look or function just slightly different, but they're available to students to ensure equitable access to the assessments. So it's important to note that resources assigned for both the CAASPP or the LPAC, they should reflect the resources the students are using daily or in their class or on their classroom assessments. So, they still need to practice with specific CAASPP or LPAC resources for testing. We're going to go over that a little bit later, but students should be generally familiar with resources prior to taking the CAASPP or the LPAC. It's important to remember that giving all students resources such as embedded color contrasts that they don't really need may be distracting and could potentially hurt their performance on an assessment. Successful use of accessibility resources requires that the educational team make decisions regarding supports to use on a student-by-student basis. So the matrix, the California Assessment Accessibility Resources Matrix, aka Matrix, it lists the different types of accessibility resources for CAASPP and ELPAC. So there's been a link that's placed in the resource guide, but we're going to later show you and guide you on how where you can find that link on the CAASPP and ELPAC webpage. So the Matrix is your one-stop shop for information about accessibility resources for CAASPP and LPAC assessments. It could take a little getting used to because it is a big document, especially if you haven't used it before. But it's one of the first resources updated each year with any changes to accessibility resources. So it's a good resource to rely on and definitely keep it bookmarked. So there's four types of resources that are listed in the matrix. The first type is the universal tools. Universal tools are available to all students on the basis of individual choice and preference. You don't have to do anything to turn on the universal tools. It comes built into the assessment. Some examples of universal tools include Zoom, Highlighter, and Notepad. The second and next accessibility resource type are designated supports. Designated supports are available to any students for whom a need has been identified by an adult who is familiar with the student's instructional needs. So you heard that right. You don't need to have an individualized educational program, also known as an IEP, or a Section 504 plan to get designated supports. Just an identified need, such as an English learner or a struggling reader. Designated supports include things like translated test directions or text-to-speech for certain assessments. This is great information to pass along to site coordinators and your teachers in your LEA because this important information isn't always widely known. So the third level, next level, are accommodations. So for accommodations, the student does need to have an IEP or Section 504 plan, and the accommodation must be specifically identified for each assessment and designated on the statewide testing page of the IEP or Section 504 plan for that student. Accommodations are things like American Sign Language, ASL, Braille, or word completion. So I'm going to pause here for a moment before we move on to the fourth type. For the three types of accessibility resources listed on this slide deck, universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations, students who use these during the assessment will still get a valid test score. Okay, so keep that in mind. I'm going to say that one more time because it's very important. The use of universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations do not affect the student's test score in any way. There's no penalty to the LEA for assigning these resources since these resources do not change the construct of what is being measured. So I'm going to just take a quick break, just take a sip of water. All right, the fourth type. The fourth type is unlisted resources. So as you see here, unlisted resources are only for students who have an active IEP or Section 504 plan and are eligible. So students who have an active IEP or Section 504 plan are eligible to request an unlisted resource, and the unlisted resource must be specified in the IEP or Section 504 plan. Unlisted resources are resources that are not already identified as an allowed universal tool, designated support, or accommodation. So the resources listed before. And this is noted in the matrix. Unlisted resources are rare. So again, before you submit a request for your unlisted resource, first check the matrix to confirm that the resource isn't already listed. For example, we often get requests for, or CDE often gets requests for an unlisted resource request for breaks or communicative devices for amplification, but those are both already listed in the matrix, so you wouldn't have to submit a request for an unlisted resource. For a student to access an enlisted resource, a testing coordinator must submit a request to CDE through TOM, so the Test Operation Management System, a minimum of 10 business days before the student's first day of testing. The CDE is going to review that requested support, and approve will be granted by the CDE on the basis of the IEP, on the student's IEP team or Section 504 plan, and only if the unlisted resource does not compromise the assessment's security. The CDE is also going to determine whether the test construct being measured will change the use of this resource. If the construct will not change, the student will still get a valid score. But if the requested resource does change the construct of what is being measured on the assessment, the student will get a valid test, the student will not get a valid test score. This means when an unlisted resource is determined to change the construct of what is being tested, the student's CAASPP score will be removed from aggregations, not be counted as participating for accountability, and be invalidated. So definitely note that. For ELPAC, however, the student will be assigned the lowest obtainable scale score, so also known as loss. The CDE will reach out to the LEAs for more information if needed when a request is not clear. If the LEA does not respond within 10 days, or it is at the end of the LEA's testing window, whichever is sooner, the CDE will approve the request but may conclude that the requested resource will change the construct of being measured.
Yeah. Thanks, Ashley. Yeah,
You're
and there
welcome.
was actually a question on the Padlet about unlisted resources, so I think this would be a good time to mention that as well. Someone asked specifically about like graphic organizers, I think was an example used, or sentence frames. Um, and that's an example of something that will invalidate a score, that would change the construct of the test. Um, but the other part of that question was just how do we know if an unlisted resource we request will invalidate the student score? And you can always, if you want to check that before submitting something, you can actually email the CDE directly about that. You can email, it's casp@cde.ca.gov. But like Ashley said, um, definitely make sure to check the matrix thoroughly, because a lot of the requests that we get, or the CDE gets for unlisted resources, are something that's already included, that is one of the already potentially one of those universal tools, designated supports, or accommodations. All right. We're going to move on to talk about a few updates for this year. So a lot is the same as in previous years for accessibility resources, but there's a few updates this year, specific updates for this test administration. And these are reflected in the new version of the matrix document that Ashley talked about. And that updated new version of the matrix is available now. Um, One of the bigger changes is the inclusion of the new sensory items resource, which is a non-embedded accommodation. And this is for resources like a fidget spinner, or something that a student uses as a sensory item. So that is a brand new addition to the matrix. Everything else is just a slight change. So for instance, there's a few new resources available for the CSA, or the California Spanish Assessment, including word completion, text to speech, and speech to text. So those three have been available for other assessments in the past, but now they're available for the CSA as well. Another change that you may notice is that translations, or also called Spanish stacked dual language, there was a difference last year in how that resource functioned for the math test versus how it functioned for the California Science Test, or the CAST. So the kind of older functionality of this was that it would actually stack the English on top of the Spanish translation in the test. But now both for math and for cast, there's actually a toggle button. So there's that newer toggle functionality where you can switch between the student can switch between English and Spanish during the test at any time using a toggle button in the test. So last year that was only available for math and not for science, and now that's updated for both. So science has that too. And then there's a bunch of other small updates in the matrix, including updated descriptions that should clarify some common questions. And a lot of the descriptions now link to our other online resources, such as our accessibility guide, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well. And the link to that updated matrix, again, we'll show you where it is, but it's also in your resource guide. All right, and then we also wanted to talk about these valuable resources that kind of make it a little easier to navigate some of the resources and get a higher level view of what resources are available for which tests. So these accessibility graphics are assessment specific, and they display all of the available resources categorized by their type and whether they are embedded or non-embedded. So embedded resources are built in to the computer-based test delivery system, or TDS, such as a highlighter function. So that's an embedded universal tool you can use right there in the test. Non-embedded means that the resource is provided outside of the computer-based TDS, such as scratch paper, for instance. So that's a non-embedded universal tool. So this example graphic is for CAST. Some examples of designated supports for CAST are the translations Spanish stack dual language, which I mentioned before. Um, and separate setting is another one, which is a non-embedded designated support that's used when the student needs to take the assessment in a different setting than a typical group administration. So these graphics at right now, at the time of this training, are in the process of being updated. Folks often ask about when these are going to be available for the new administration year. They are close to being ready. So they should be, those newest versions should be available in the next couple of weeks or so, is the last I heard. But the ones that are available now are pretty close. Like I, mentioned in that previous slide, there's a few things that'll be added or changed. But for the most part, they're accurate, and we'll show you where those are in an upcoming in our demonstration as well. And then this is the bottom half of that same graphic. So this displays the accommodations as well as some instructions about unlisted resources and alternate assessment resources. Alternate assessments may not need the same resources as the general assessments, since those alternate assessments are administered one-on-one. But an example of an embedded accommodation for CAST in this case is speech to text, which is a non-embedded accommodation. Sorry, an example of a non-embedded one is large print special form, which is a larger printed out test form that can be ordered for students who need it. So just a few different examples there of some accommodations. And then a brand new couple of tools that you may not have heard of. Well, not totally brand new. They were available last year, but I think made available kind of through the year. So relatively new tools are these student needs matching tool documents. So there's one for CAASPP and one for ELPAC. And these documents identify resources that might support various student needs, such as executive functioning, persistent calculation disability, reading related disabilities, and more. So these are linked in your resource guide, but it's a really handy way to view the resources organized in a different way by actual student need. So this can really help folks determine what type of resources a student might need. All right. So that's the end of our first major section here. So we're gonna give you all a little bit of processing time to uh, look at some of what has been entered into the Padlet already um, and process some of the information that we've talked through so far. Um, and I will cover a few of these out loud because there's some really great questions, a whole bunch of questions already, and a lot of folks are in the background helping answer some of these questions. But I'm gonna try to be quiet for about 30 seconds to actually give you all a chance to process and look at these before we dive into a few questions.
Check out the links too that are
Yeah,
in the on the Padlet. Open them
definitely.
up, bookmark them.
I'm gonna take a scroll through as well. Right. Okay, so I definitely see a few questions that I think that we can speak to right now. So there's a couple of questions about designated supports. Let's see. So one person asked if there's a limit to the number of students who can have designated supports. Um, so there's no limit uh, as far as who can have those supports assigned, but we strongly suggest um, that students are actually familiar with the use of those reports. You know, you should be assigning designated supports to student based on what they actually use in the classroom and what they actually need. There shouldn't be any cases where you're just blanket giving everybody a designated support. It really should be based on each individual student. So keep that in mind, even though there isn't a limit there, it should be individualized. And then there's another question about how designated supports should be documented. Um, and um, there's a comment from our colleague Judy who says that the CDE recommends documenting those designated supports as a best practice, but it's not necessarily required to have those saved somewhere else. Um, but most of the time you're gonna and another comment that says that your teachers and other folks besides just your testing systems also need to know about students supports that they should have access to. So there's likely another way that you should be keeping track of those. But I like to bring up and really talk about designated supports often, and Ashley did a great job of highlighting this too, because there are a lot of folks that focus really hard on the students that have IEPs or Section 504 plans, and of course getting them the required resources, accommodations for those students, but there's a ton of students that could benefit from some of these designated supports. So finding out if your school or district has a system of recommending those and then getting them assigned in TOMS is really important. But every school has kind of a different way of handling that, or districts have different ways of handling that. So especially if you're an educator um, and you want to make sure that your students have access to the supports that they need, you should be communicating with your site testing coordinator or your district testing coordinator or both about the best way to make sure those are all in place.
Very well said, Tyler.
Anything else that you're seeing that we should um, handle right away, Ashley?
Um,
Let's see. A few folks
no.
asking about the graphics, the accessibility graphics, and I mentioned that
Yeah, I
those
see
should be
that too.
available in the next couple weeks. So yeah, I think we can probably move on, and then we'll try to catch any questions that we haven't covered later.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and take over from here, and we're going to talk a little bit about user roles and responsibilities. So it's an important thing to know about accessibility for both CAASPP and ELPAC, the related roles and responsibilities, and who does what at your LEA. So remember that LEA basically means that your district or possibly a single charter school or school network. So while LEAs may have different processes and staff for supporting accessibilities, these are the roles that typically exist in the testing world, the roles listed right on the slide. So the first one, an LEA CASP coordinator or LEA LPAC coordinator, is typically at the LEA level, and they look over all aspects of testing. So it's often we'll see the same person that's both for the LEA coordinator for both CASP and LPAC, but it's not always, especially if it's a large LEA. Depending on the size of the LEA. So the LEA coordinators usually decimate information to school site coordinators, who then provide information to the staff who are examiners or test examiners or test administrators. Who generally administer the CAASPP. And then there's the test examiners who administer the California alternate assessments, so the CAAs or the ELPAC, and therefore require more specific training before administering assessments. I did want to just note that test examiners, they also have the ability to administer both the general and the alternate assessments. So there's also a role called the IA administrator only. So this role is sometimes given to educators who aren't administering the summative assessments, but want to administer the interim assessments. Some LEAs assign staff to the IA administrator only role in the fall, and then assign test administrator or test examiner roles later in the year, right before the summative testing starts, so that they're ready and prepared. There are other important roles, such as the special education staff who are handling student evaluations and writing those IEPs and Section 504 plans, and a lot more. There may also be technology staff who have a role in updating student records and other technology tasks. So, like we mentioned, prior processes for assigning accessibility resources, also known as test settings and TOMS and other systems, can vary widely among LEAs. So typically, LEA coordinators or the site coordinators handle the assignment of the test settings and TOMS. We'll kind of go into detail later of how you assign those test settings and TOMS because we have a wider audience here today. But those are resources that we'll point out later and show you in the resource guide as we cover that later. Educators also have an important role in this process. So educators can request or suggest accessibility resources for students, as Tyler mentioned, particularly the designated supports. Again, those are for students with IEP or 504, Section 504 plan. And special education staff can also specify accommodations that may be needed. If a student has a resource already assigned in TOMS, it will appear for their summative assessments as well as the interim assessments. So test administrators and test examiners who are just administering the practice tests, the training, or the interim assessments, they can temporarily set accessibility resources for those tests in the test administrator interface, also known as the TA interface. But if something needs to be set temporarily in the practice test, so if the test administrator and the test examiner set that test setting in the TA interface temporarily, it's only going to appear for that one testing session. So to make sure that a student gets those resources for the summative testing, you want to ensure that the test setting is set in TOMS prior to them testing and starting. We're going to kind of go over that a little later when we present our demo. So crucial aspects of assigning accessibility resources are communication with the right people and knowing who to reach out to. So find contacts at your LEA, at your school site, who can help you. If you know who your LEA coordinator or your test site coordinator is, they're a great person to start with. If you don't know who that is, you can reach out to an administrator to help you find out who that person is. It's also important to communicate with instructional staff who work directly with the students and to find out the resources they're using in the classroom that can be assigned for the assessment. So communication is key and ask questions. So we're gonna just take a quick little pause again and see if there's any questions on the Padlet we can grab and answer live.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. Yeah, I think, understanding are all the different roles involved, and what you can do, is really important for everybody, knowing how to get students assigned the right things. So, thanks for taking us through that. Um, for questions on the Padlet, there's a few things that we're gonna cover in the next section about practicing with accessibility resources. So we'll get to some of that soon. Um, and there's a few questions, kind of specific to certain resources, and we'll try to get to some of the most common ones of those. But also, we'll show you some resources that have video demonstrations of resources or the expanded um, descriptions and things that are available in our accessibility guide. Let's see here.
So there's a question
Okay.
that it just kind of keeps hitting me like when I scroll through. So it's about universal tools, and they're asking, is it common practice to list in IEPs the universal tools such as breaks or scratch paper? Are they necessary if scholars are being provided these? So I don't I mean, I assume they're all universal tools are available to all students. So, but if the IEP team, shouldn't they still provide what settings the student would need on an assessment regardless, or because it's a universal tool, they don't need to indicate it in the IEP? It's a
Yeah,
good
I mean,
question.
uh, you know, the IEPs obviously have a greater usage than just for CASPA and ELPAC, right? So, um, noting anything in there, it's obviously up to the um, school psychologist and the IEP team, whoever's working on determining that, because it might be important to list those things for, their regular classroom instruction, right? Um, and it's also possible there are ways to turn off universal tools for certain students that, maybe they have it written in their IEP that they, need to avoid certain tools because they get distracted or something like that. So there often might be, more details in the IEP than are necessary, but having it listed in there um, doesn't necessarily, change what they have available for the test. If it's a universal tool, it's going to be there unless it's specifically turned off. Yeah, so that's a
Yes, I agree.
good thing to bring
It
up.
was a good question, though.
Yeah. Um, let's see. Okay, well, I think we can go ahead and move to our next section. There'll be a few kind of general questions that we can handle towards the end. Um,
Sounds good.
Yeah, but let's move on to practicing with accessibility resources. This is really, really, really valuable. And I think that, there's a lot of stuff that comes up in the spring when testing is all of a sudden upon us, and a lot of information flying around. So it's really good for us to think about how we can get not only students familiar with accessibility resources, but teachers, test administrators, and test examiners as well. Um, so we did already mention that students should be, somewhat familiar with resources based on what they are using in the classroom. But because there can be differences between what the students use every day and how it shows up on the tests, there will still be some need to become familiar with the resources as they appear and function on CAASPP and ELPAC tests. So the practice and training tests are the first kind of stop for that, but then interim assessments are a great way to get practice as well. So we'll show you how to find these resources in that upcoming demo. But this is just a little breakdown of these and the different uses for them. So practice and training tests are a good first step because they're public and easy to access. Um, the difference between practice and training tests are usually very short, so they're good for just like initial practice with the accessibility resources and just getting familiar with the testing interface in general. Practice tests are slightly longer than training tests usually, so they're a little bit better for maybe building familiarity with the structure of the assessments. So practice and training tests can be accessed as a guest user. So that means that students, if they are taking a practice or training test as a guest user, they won't see any accessibility resources that are assigned to them in TOMS, unless a practice test session is created and the student logs on with their information. Um, but accessibility resources can be manually added to those practice and training tests as a guest user as well. So the next kind of step is the interim assessments. So interim assessments provide teachers with more accurate information on student performance to really help gauge students' knowledge and skills. Um, they the interim assessments cannot be used for actual high stakes purposes, but they do accurately mirror the standards of the associated subject. Um, there are interim assessments for ELA, English Language Arts and Literacy. There's interim assessments for math, for science, and for ELPAC. There's no interim assessments for the alternate assessments. Um, And importantly, the interim assessments are secure and non-public. So that means that the test content is secure, that cannot be released to the public, so that we can maintain that test security. But interim assessments can be used flexibly in the classroom in a variety of ways. So they're good, also really good for trying new accessibility resources and for more sustained practice with resources on content that can actually be scored. So yeah, as long as you keep in mind that those interim assessments are secure and only LEA staff and students can have access to them. Um, yeah, so those interim assessment items should never be given to students to take home or shared with staff outside your LEA or posted on third-party systems. But using something, having you run a test session and then having your students log in, maybe to start with the practice and training tests and then having a session for the interim assessments as well is a really, really, really great way to get everybody just more comfortable, making sure your students have the right things assigned to them. And when you do that, you'll see a way to check the students' accessibility resources before starting a test session. So test administrators and test examiners can review and temporarily assign accessibility resources to students um, in these tests. So when a test administrator or test examiner sets up a test session for any interim assessment, or an actual test session for the practice and training test as well. Part of that process is to approve students to begin the assessment. And before approving a student to start testing, they can check or potentially change the student's assigned test settings. Um, and by the way, I'm not sure if we mentioned it, but accessibility resources and test settings mean the same thing for our sake. They're called test settings in our systems in TOMS, but that just means accessibility resources. Um, so in the screen that appears in the approvals tab of the test administrator interface where you're making a test session, students who are waiting for approval will appear here. And in the See Details column, that view icon, that eyeball icon, is displayed with the text default if there's no test settings assigned to that student, or it'll say custom if there are test settings already assigned. And then that view icon can be selected to display the test setting screen that looks something like this. So on this test setting screen, any existing settings will be displayed. Um, and importantly, for the practice test or for interim assessments, the test administrator or examiner will be able to change these settings temporarily for the student, but they'll only apply for that current testing session if they're changed here. For summative assessments, these settings can't be changed in this screen. It's just a way to check. So if you discover a mistake for a summative assessment, such as a resource that isn't assigned but should be, you should not approve the student to start that assessment and should instead contact your site coordinator to change the setting in TOMS. And that change will take at least usually 2 to 4 hours after it's been updated in TOMS and before it appears in the student's assessment. Um, so even though that's a delay of testing for that student, it's a much better option than the student taking it without the resource that they might need, that they should be assigned, because that'll take a lot longer to fix that problem. Um, Also worth noting that in this screen, some of the resources may have slightly different names in this test settings screen than what is in TOMS or in the matrix. For example, we've talked a few times about the translation Spanish stacked dual language resource in the matrix. Um, and here it's shown as the presentation language. So it'll say presentation, and then you can change it to Spanish to display the assessment in Spanish and have the students toggle back and forth. So just note that there's a few small differences like that that you might notice. All right, and lastly, I mentioned summative testing. It's really important to confirm those resources prior to testing to avoid any kind of mistakes or delays. And it really helps if the student is aware of which resources they should have during testing. And of course, classroom practice with the interim assessments or practice and training tests may help with that. So ideally, test administrators and test examiners should have a list to confirm the resources for each student prior to starting a test session so that they can actually check the resources and let the students know too. If you need help with getting that information in advance, make sure that you're communicating with your site coordinator or district coordinator as you need to, because and there are also ways to find this information in TOMS. But if you aren't sure how to do that, your coordinator can help you. All right. So this is our last processing time before we do a demonstration of the website. So I'm gonna give us a few just a few extra seconds to take a look at the Padlet page. Again, I'm gonna try to be quiet to just like let our brains catch up a little bit. Give you a chance to go take a look at the Padlet page. Um, and if you had asked a question, uh, go in and see if someone has answered it. And if you haven't asked a question, but maybe have one, go and look and see if somebody's already asked the question that you had in mind. But I am going to um, just going to put on some very quiet little background music and just give us like a minute or so. If you need to, go to the bathroom real quick, we're just going to pause for a minute and then talk about some questions for a minute or so or two. Um, and so you can do that now. Right. I am seeing lots of questions and lots of answers in the background here. Um,
The music was very soothing, by the
Good.
way.
I know. I feel a little bit more calm. That's the goal. Um, I do see some good questions in here that I think that we can cover before we jump into our demo. Um, the first one, I'm going to start with things related to the practice tests and interim assessments that we just talked about. Um, I see someone asked, do the interims count against your LEA if you just want the kids to log in and try it? And there's some clarification. I think maybe they mean, you know, um, that those test scores, like what are the implications of taking an interim assessment, right? So obviously there's no um, uh, problem taking the interim assessments, and the results can be shared with students and with families, but they're not by default. It depends on how you use the interim assessments. There's actually a selection when creating a test session for the interims. You can select standardized or non-standardized. And for both of those, scores are still recorded and sent to the California Educator Reporting System, or CERS. Um, so scores are sent no matter what, but for a non-standardized test administration, that might mean, the students using a resource that they might not normally have access to, or, that they've practiced with the questions beforehand or something like that. And so it'll, in CERS, in that reporting system, um, the students' results will be tagged with that non-standardized, just so that you and others who have access to that student's scores can see that that might not be a perfect indication of how they would perform in a standardized testing environment. Um, but if you're just starting, if you just want kids to log in and try something, I would definitely recommend doing a practice test or a training test first. And you can start a test session to kind of really get the full experience of that. So that might be a better first step. And then use the interims when you want the students to have a little bit more practice in an environment where they're also, you know, uh, actually trying to perform on the test to answer the questions accurately. Let's see. And then I saw a question about for those folks who might have an interim assessment only role, who um, are just, for now at least administering interims and maybe not summative assessments. There's a question about whether those folks are required to be trained, or a recommended training. And they don't need to, if you have the IA administrator only role, uh, there's no security agreement that you are forced to sign in TOMS, but there is an optional form that different districts, or schools can use to have folks sign that separately. Um, there's a link in this question, um, as well, to that optional sample interim assessment security agreement. And it's a good idea to make sure that whoever has that role assigned to them understands that, even though you're not signing an agreement the same way as a summative test administrator would, you still need to keep the interim assessments secure. And so there should be some education or training, and there are plenty of resources on our website that kind of go over the interim assessments and the basics of some of that, including a video series that's really helpful. So you will maybe want to keep that in mind. Let's see. Yeah, and there were also questions about how teachers get results from the interim assessments. We won't go into the whole process because there's a few steps to that, but I mentioned CERS, the California Educator Reporting System, and there's a few links that were shared in there that will help you get started on getting access to results from the interim assessments.
Tyler, there's
Yeah,
a question about says, is there a similar ELPAC student needs matching tool to the one for CAS? There is one for both ELPAC and CASP. So
yeah,
maybe during and the link is in it's actually in the question now.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But it's in
Thanks
the
for
Padlet.
folks got to that one quick, but yeah,
Yes.
and it's also in your in the resource guide document. Awesome. Okay, well, I say let's jump into our website demonstration. Um, so one of the problems with anything related to whoops, here we go, related to testing is there's a ton of resources, there's a ton of information. Um, and we make these the handouts like the resource guide to give you some of those links, but I really think it's helpful for us to actually see it, so that you can navigate to the resources yourself, on our website on casp-lpac.org. So I'm going to zoom in just a little bit more for us. But we are on the homepage of CASP and LPAC, .org here, and I'm going to take us through a few of the most common places for us to, whoops, I keep clicking on something that makes my window minimize. Here we go. So I'm going to take us through a few of the kind of most relevant pages. So I'm going to start with our accessibility resources webpage. This page is linked directly on the Padlet, but like I said, if you're on our homepage, it's helpful to know how to get there. So in the navigation bar, there's a top navigation bar with search and system links to get straight to different systems. But then in the main navigation, we've got a few drop-down menus, and we're going to go to the resources drop-down. And under preparation, the very first link is the accessibility resources page. So I'm going to select that. And right at the top of the accessibility resources page is this handy common links section that has 6 different buttons on it. So a lot of the things that you'll be looking for will probably be in here, and the biggest one is the matrix. So the California Assessment Accessibility Resources Matrix is the first button on this page, and that will take you to a page with just a little bit more information and this prominent link here that will download the matrix, which is, I saw someone ask this on the Padlet as well, about exactly, how to access this document. It is a Word doc. It's not a PDF. So when you select it, it'll download in your browser of choice. And you can open that document up. I saw someone had noted that they're on a Mac, so they didn't have Microsoft Word installed, but you can open that up in your browser. In Google Docs, for instance, will open that file type, um, and a few other programs as well. But that's the Bible. That's kind of like the most up-to-date information um, uh, that you can get on accessibility resources and which assessments they are applicable to. So that's the Matrix webpage. I'm going to go back to our accessibility resources page, and point out a few more of these resources. So the graphics that I mentioned that will be updated for the upcoming year pretty soon in the next couple of weeks are available on the kind of second button. And on this page, each graphic is a PDF file that is separated into programs for CAASPP and ELPAC and the different assessments. So that's where you can access those. And when they get updated, the header will be changed to 25, 26. But like I mentioned, those are still pretty helpful right now, even before they get updated. I'm going to go back one more time to our accessibility resources page, and click on this third button that I think a lot of folks have asked about. What does a specific resource look like? How is it used? I saw someone ask about, is there a training for scribes specifically? And while there's not a training for individual resources for the most part, there are these demonstration videos. And if we select that button, our demonstration videos page, there's a whole list of pretty much any embedded resource, so anything that's part of the testing system, but then even a few non-embedded ones such as Scribe, um, or Read Aloud, and a few other ones. There are videos for almost all of those that you might need. Um, and there are also videos. So there's a video for each resource in English, and there's videos in Spanish as well. So if you want to get an idea of how a resource works, what it looks like in the test before actually going into a test session, these videos are a really great resource. All right, we're going to go back one more time. Also, another, a good follow-up for this training, if you want to dive a little bit deeper into the world of accessibility resources, we have an on-demand training. So there's several different modules available for educators. There's two modules as part of this training, and you can go to this webpage to work through these modules. So there's a bunch of links on how to assign, but then there's also a whole module on matching accessibility resources to students' needs, as well as using accessibility resources in daily instruction. So these are a great way to dive in a little bit deeper. Like I said, there's a bunch of videos that were made with um, with the help of a colleague, Lily Rosenberger, who, if you don't know Lily. She's a master of all things accessibility. So she made these great videos and helped us kind of put all of this into a nice package for folks to learn a little bit more. So definitely check that out if you're looking to kind of take the next step. And then back to our landing page, accessibility resources, there's a button for resources with students, for students with visual impairments. There's a whole page of translated test directions, um, and then a ton of other resources and links. So for coordinators that were asking about how to actually assign test settings in TOMS, there are some videos and information on this page. There are some links to our accessibility guide, which we'll talk about in a second, and some videos about our ISAP tool, about our scribing and read aloud guidelines, and then those two I'm not going to mention every single thing on this page, but I will mention the student needs matching tools that have come up. These are relatively new. The CAASPP student needs matching tool and the ELPAC student needs matching tool are linked under this determining student accessibility needs header. And then there's a few, there were also, I think I saw questions about non-embedded resources like the multiplication table and hundreds number table are located on this page as well. So a whole bunch of good information and resources available just on this one page. And then, like I mentioned, we'll go to our tools and instructions and click on the accessibility guide. So if you have used any of our manuals before, this is our manual that has all of our info about accessibility resources. This is still in the process of being updated as well for the current administration year. I'm not sure exactly if we have a timeline that we can share on when that will be available, but it should be relatively soon. But this is a really great place to get detailed information about accessibility resources if it's not in the matrix. It might even now link you to this page
Yeah,
or to this
Tyler,
manual. Yeah.
the chapter that I particularly like to direct LEAs to is accessibility features for the CASP and LPAC. It kind of just goes more into detail about each universal tool designated support and accommodation. It also provides like snippets that aren't in the matrix so that you can kind of see a visual of that setting that the student's going to use, and just a little bit more description. Also, those links that you talked about, Tyler,
Mm.
how to take them to the videos or any PDFs, um, approved assessments. It's kind of, the Matrix is a big PDF book and the chart like type, where this is more, like a guide. You can print it out, but I
Yeah,
particularly like these chapters right here.
for sure. Yeah, a lot of good extra detail. Yeah, if there's, things like for color contrast here, not only, yeah, like you mentioned, are there links to the videos that were on that other page that I mentioned, but it gives you like actually what all the options are available for that, right? Um,
Embedded and non-embedded as well. So that's good
yes.
to see.
Yeah. Yeah, and some screenshots and other things that you might want to take a look at as well. All right. Um, I think the only other thing on the website that I want to demo very quickly, um, just to cover all of our bases here, is for the practice and training tests and for the interim assessments. Um, there are resources available for those as well. So in our navigation bar, I'm going to select the resources drop down and look at preparation. Again, that header, and a little farther down under that section is the practice and training tests page. So this is the page that you would go to if you want to either jump right into a practice or training test as a guest, or for student access, is this student access to tests button. If you're starting a test session where you really want to like try the whole functionality, the test administrator practice and training interface is available here. And there's also scoring guides and rubrics, and other resources available from this page. Um, but we can actually see if we select student access to tests. Um, you can select continue as guest and then select a guest session to just jump right into tests. So if you want to get an idea of what this looks like before your students are going in here, we can select a Smarter Balance practice test. And like I said, these are publicly available, um, open for anyone to come on here and check out what these look like. And as you can see, before you get into the test, you're able to actually select your test settings. So I chose a grade 5 ELA practice test, and there are selections to change, to turn on American Sign Language. We can turn on text to speech, or word completion, or change our color contrast settings as well. So this is an easy way to just get in and start playing around if you're someone like me who sometimes just wants to try it for themselves and just like get in there and play around with stuff. Um, you can do that using these practice and training tests. Um, so we'll go back to
Now,
our,
Tyler,
yeah.
just wanted to mention too, oh, before you left that screen,
Oh, go back.
for if a student has the setting, because I know you had mentioned it in the presentation, if they have the setting already set in Tom's, they would need to log in using their SSID and just like how it's shown on the screen right now. If they continue as a guest, the setting won't be there.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, that's good to know. All right. So we were on the practice and training tests. So I'm just going to quickly show where all of the information about the interim assessments are if you wanted to start diving into that. So in our navigation bar under the assessments dropdown, you'll see there's a list of CAASPP assessments, ELPAC assessments, and then the interim assessments has its own column. And if you select that page, we've got another set of buttons at the top of this page for all the different systems related to the interim assessments. So there's the viewing system, TOMS, of course, and a whole bunch of other stuff. But then as you keep scrolling down this page, you'll find the interim assessment lookup tool, which identifies what the actual assessments available are, what standards they measure. We'll actually open that up because folks are often interested in this tool that's is this a couple years old now or a
Hmm.
year and a half old now? It's
Yeah.
a really handy way to view interim assessments and see all kinds of information, what grades they're available for, and all of that. And then, of course, our user guides and quick reference guides, and that video series that I mentioned, the CAASPP and ELPAC interim assessment video series. If you want to learn more about the interims in general, you can watch some of those videos. All right, anything else, Ashley, that you want to mention on the website for folks before we just dive into
Um,
questions and
Just
answers?
something real quick where the manuals library is, because I know
Hmm.
we spoke about user roles. So the Tom's user guide is a good manual to refer to when you're want to look at those user roles, what type of responsibilities and roles they have. So you can get to that by the manuals library
Yep, which is under the
help tab.
in the top navigation bar under the help drop down. Yep, you can select manuals library.
And the accessibility guide is in here as well in this section. But the
Yep,
Tom's user guide is the one that would provide the information for the user roles. There's a whole chapter.
yep. Yeah, that's a really helpful page. that second chapter, user roles, and that overview, as well as some more details here. All right. Well, so that is it for our demo and brings us really to the end of our prepared content. So we've got a few minutes left to try to get through some more of these the questions that a lot of these have been answered already in the background. Thank you so much to our other ETS colleagues and colleagues from CDE who are answering a ton of questions in here. But let's see if we can find some um, that are relevant, that's helpful to bring up. Let's see. And I don't know if Dina or anybody else, if you've seen any questions that you'd like to answer out loud, feel free to jump on and walk us through some of these. Let's see here.
Let me scroll through a few of these.
Yeah.
Um, we did have a few questions about calculators.
Mm,
Mainly using non-embedded calculators. Does that um, change the requirement of only being able to use calculators for the calculator allowed questions?
mm.
And so if a student has an accommodation for a physical calculator, non-embedded, um, that can still only be used for the allowable questions for a calculator. And I know that that comes up a lot throughout the year, and that's worthy of repeating.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thank you, Dina. Yeah, that's when you're using the embedded calculator, right, that button only pops up on certain items. So if you're unfamiliar with what Dina's talking about there, it's if you're then replacing that embedded calculator with a physical non-embedded calculator, that calculator should be used on the same items where the embedded one is available. Um, so yeah, a pretty detailed thing that we hear pretty often. Yeah,
Mm.
thank you.
And let's see if we can
Let's
find
see.
any others that came up a few times.
So I'll mention if there's a few questions about the automated test settings feature that's can be optionally set up between SACE or which is the oh, I always forget what SACE actually stands for. But it's a special education information system, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so a lot of folks use use SACE, that database, to manage their students with IEPs or Section 504 plans. Um, and you can have that connection set up between those. And I know we're working on getting some more information out there available for folks that use that connection. Um, but there were several questions about that, and I do think it is worth um, noting. Someone asked about um, whether that needs to be manually configured each year. Um, and after the rollover that happened in Tom's in early July, test settings are cleared out for students. So when the new year comes up, those students might still be in SACE and have those test settings already in there. But what SACE sends to Tom's, if you have that connection set up, is only changes, only new things or things that get changed. So you may need to export what is already in SACE and upload it into Tom's if you haven't already done that. If you do that once a year after the rollover and then continue that automatic update, then it will work the same way it did last year. Let's see. and in general, I'll just mention about that. I'll add to that comment about the SACE and TOMS connection. If you're having an issue specifically with SACE, you should, for most troubleshooting things, you should contact SACE. Our success agents can help with some questions about, like, maybe how to just get that set up, but a lot of the times you're going to need to reach out to SACE directly for any kind of troubleshooting with that feature. And there's a few other student information systems that also have that automatic connection set up. So if you have any questions about that, hopefully your LEA coordinator will know. If you are the LEA coordinator and you need more info on it, you should reach out to your SIS vendor directly to ask about those features.
We also
Let's
had a
see.
couple
Yeah.
of other questions where they were asking about using interim as kind of a practice test. Um, and so these questions were presented a little bit differently. But basically, if you have a student that just wants to practice a few things, but you don't want to open up an interim test, there is an alternative. It's the practice test um, that was mentioned a little bit earlier. And so that way you don't have to kind of use up your interim allowed tests because they are, for ICAs, they're limited. You can practice everything on the practice test. If you want the student to practice just logging in, that's an easy way to allow them to practice that. Or like mentioned earlier, the test settings, make sure that their test settings are set in toms. And also the practice test is a good way to double check to make sure that the test settings are available before you begin, say, a summative test. And that way you don't have to take time to submit stairs and reset if the test settings didn't reach the test yet. So the practice tests are kind of a really good tool for a lot of different things. So definitely keep that in mind.
Yeah. Thank you, Dina. So many good so much good information in here. I'm trying to parse it all and see what we've talked about and what we haven't, but lot of excellent information in here, and I hope this has been helpful to folks. We had a few different types of roles with us today, and different experience levels. So hopefully you have gotten a good sense of what is available for you, what kind of resources you can go to find more. So this is I think, topic that's really, um, really of interest, really, really important to both me and Ashley, that folks know what's available for people and what is available for students to give them the tools that they need to actually perform on the tests that give us accurate information about where they are with their learning. Um, and all of this works better the more folks know about it and the more students get to practice and get exposure to these resources that they should be using all the time. If it's happening in class, it should be happening during testing as well. So really appreciate your time. Um, coming to this. We do have, so as soon as we close our session, um, we're kind of right towards the end of it. As soon as we close our session, it will automatically launch a survey for you. So if you have found this helpful, or if you have tips on how to improve this training in future years, please take a few minutes. It's a pretty short survey. You can fill that out and give us any feedback that you want. Um, and we really appreciate that. We really do look at those results and try to improve our trainings every single year. Um, Yeah, I think we've covered a lot of the information, a lot of the questions that have come through Padlet. If you still though have questions, please feel free to reach out to us. You can get to the training team directly by emailing caloutreach@ets.org. And if your school or district pays for professional development, you can email us, and we can, confirm your attendance through that email address as well. If you still have questions, you can email us there, but you should also talk to your site coordinator, and up to your district coordinator, who can talk to your success agent, and maybe it's Ashley, who would answer the phone and help you out if you have more complicated questions, or other things that they can help with. They are always there to be a wonderful resource to folks. So if you're a coordinator, you can contact your success agents directly. Um, and yeah,
And there's a link on the page too, also, if you needed to look up which region or which success agent you have under the help tab.
Yeah, yeah. If you go to our contact page, that'll give you all that information that you need to know. And like I said, this Padlet will stay available. I think most of the questions are answered, but if not, keep an eye on it for the next little bit. I'm going to try and go through and make sure all the questions that were asked during are answered. Oh, and I see Dina put the contact page in our chat for us as well. Thank you, Dina.
Thank you.
But yeah, keep an eye on the Padlet. But if it uh, doesn't get answered today, then feel free to find a way to contact us, and we'll get you the answers that you need. All right. Well, thank you so much,
Thank
everyone.
you, everyone.
Yeah, appreciate your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your school year. Thanks all.
Thank you.
See you next time.